I am delighted to be joined today by Dr Joshua Wolrich. We've just had a conversation about how to pronounce your name, so I might have got it right, might have got it wrong.
Perfect.
Currently A&E doctor, nutrition coach.
A coach sounds so wishy-washy, doesn't
Counsellor?
it? Requires a qualification. I go with nutrition counselling just because it makes people understand what it means. I'm a doctor. I work with people on their relationship with food, and I like to do social media in my spare time. That sums it up.
Okay. Excellent. And you also wrote a book that I really loved, Food Isn't Medicine, which I think I read about 18 months ago. Because in my field, of course, everybody seems to think that food is both the cause of every ill and the cure of every ill and the path to healing every issue. So you resoundingly address all of those myths, don't you, in your
Hopefully.
book?
It's not getting any
socials.
Not getting any better in the wider world.
I think it's getting a bit worse, actually.
Oh yeah, I think we've got Trump and Maha to blame for that, unfortunately. but yes, it's more and more timely as time goes on, which is not a terrible thing.
How do we navigate today's really difficult world of food, weight, stigma, shame, GLP-1s and everything else, and try somehow to heal what is most people's quite distressed relationship with food and not pass on our own baggage to our kids?
How long do we have? It's a good breadth. It's a wonderful breadth of topics, but they're all in my mind massive topics and massively crucial topics, and topics I wish we didn't have to address for all manner of reasons, right? I would just love us to continue treating food the way that food is often treated when we're super young, until often our parents or teachers start getting in the way with projecting their own thoughts and feelings around food.
So you say super young, but that's almost, depending on what relationship or what struggles we've had ourselves, that's pregnancy, it can start.
Yeah, it can.
And certainly, around feeding, how difficult is it to feed your baby? How do you feed your baby?
Yeah.
Do you get very stressed if they won't feed? Do you, how do you respond to their desires? Do you worry they've had too much or not enough? It can start immediately.
Yeah. No, it can. But even in those situations, I would still argue that the baby's relationship with food isn't at a state of being able to be messed with at that point, right? You are going to get stressed around what's going on with your baby, but the actual baby's hunger and fullness cues are still there. I don't think this might be an interesting topic in and of itself, but I don't think that a relationship with food starts until you have more cognition around some of that kind of stuff.
I don't think that a relationship in the way we're talking about it does, but I do think learned responses to whether your needs are met. And so if you're hungry and your needs aren't met, there will be a relationship forming.
And the epigenetic consequences of ongoing hunger as a kid and as a baby, and some of that stuff that takes place with starvation and things like that.
Can you say more about that?
I mean, we have a decent amount of research looking at what happens around genes in newborns, depending on the environment that they are born into, and then the stuff that they experience environmentally. And we can go straight into the hard stuff immediately if we want. Body size, right? Yeah. We have good evidence looking at the links between what happens from day naught and then what body size adults will end up at, or on average, and what kind of range of body set point they might naturally sit at, and natural being an important word at that point, because a lot of that is genetically controlled. We know that babies born into food scarcity are likely to live at a higher body weight on average than babies who are not, which I would argue turns on certain kind of thrifty genes and things that makes the body more efficient at absorbing energy from the food that it's given.
And storing energy for the
keeping hold of it.
Famine. Because I think the piece that so often gets forgotten is that actually we need food to survive. I know it sounds so stupid to say, but so many people are worried about eating too much. We forget we do actually have to eat.
Yeah.
And hunger is a survival mechanism. And scarcity is risky.
Yeah. I mean, there's a phrase I often like to use when people are talking about fun and interesting diets, fun being the objective word that they thinking about going on and going, well, do you want to survive or thrive? It's like you can survive on that weird keto diet that you're talking about, and you can survive on only eating meat for the next 6 months if you really want to, but are you going to thrive on it? And so, there's a survival aspect to food. Obviously, it's really useful to bring that back into the conversation. But I try and leave that as let's move on, because actually otherwise. We sometimes slip more into the food as medicine type thing when we talk about it being survival and like, because it's like, well, it's crucial and these nutrients and this nutrient and it's important, otherwise we won't, survive. So yeah, it's survival, but there's so much more. We would probably name 15 different reasons as to why we eat, and survival is just one of them.
It is.
Right? There's celebration, there's joy, there's community, there's culture, there's all of these other things that actually, if we take all that out and we're just left with survival, which I know that's not what you're saying, but it's interesting to bring that in, but then go, okay, let's leave it there. And what else is this to you?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I meant at the beginning when we were talking about babies and their relationship with food and going, actually, yeah, the survival stuff's there at the beginning. And yeah, that can play with epigenetics and all that. But at the point in which they're starting to recognize kind of what they want and then what they're being offered and what's available to them. And that's when, in my mind, the kind of more stereotypical relationship with food starts to play itself out. Mm-hmm. And that's the stuff that I think, as we were talking about, the adults can have the biggest impact on, right?
Massive impact. I think one of the things today is that kids will be exposed to diet culture. It's just inevitable. Kids will be exposed to an awful lot of noise around what you should eat. I rebel against should or must, unless there's an allergy or a genuine health reason. But that exposure is going to happen. So it's even more important that the adults around try and mitigate that for as long and as much as they can, if at all possible.
I mean, my daughter's 2.5-ish, and she just moved up to a different room in nursery, and we went on a visit of this new room, right? And on the board there was the allergy chart, which makes sense, right? It's sensible to have, of all of the kids in the room and what allergies they had to different foods, so that obviously when all the foods come out, it was being monitored. But it wasn't just allergies, it was allergies and preferences. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm going to have a sneaky look. Like 2-year-olds with preferences. Is this the 2-year-olds' preferences? Parents' preferences? And it was quite clear it was parents' preferences. And one kid, I feel really sorry for already, right? Because at the age of 2, they have been told no treats. And so there's a 2-year-old who doesn't ever get dessert. It's like, oh. And it's like, you're not allowed it because, and I don't know specifically the parents' reasons, but it's not an allergy thing. It's going to be a, in quotes, health thing. And it's going to be a, in quotes, sugar thing, most likely. And it's going to be all of these things that, is it so that they can then have the treats on a Saturday at home? But it just feels uncomfortable to me that already, and I didn't realize some of that stuff was so early until I'm then seeing that board on the thing, right? Because when I talk to clients as adults, they don't know what they were told at 2 years old at nursery. They know what they remember from like maybe the age of 5 or 6.
I actually do think it starts instantly because, of course, at the moment we've got no sugar for the first 1,000 days if possible. Well, that's 3 years. It's nearly 3 years, isn't it? So the communication on kind of early years feeding, it starts really young. And there's a lot of anxiety around food and sugar and highly palatable, ultra-processed, whatever we call it, and packaged snacks and getting a beating.
Snacks, dangerous topic to wade into.
Today, the legislation came out
was
today.
It actually today?
It's today on advertising, I think.
Okay.
Was it yesterday?
I mean, the advertising I'm fine with, but more the demonisation of parents actually having kids' snacks at home. That's what I've seen, right?
Yes, and the demonisation of snacking.
Yeah.
But going back to the kid at nursery who's not allowed any pudding, is more likely to have the counter effect, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
The deprivation will kick in, that sense of I really want that, it's special.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed it and therefore I need to go seek it. And because I'm not allowed it at home, I can't actually tell my parents, or I can't say that I want it or that I've had it or that I like it.
Yeah.
And there from very young begins the cycle of kind of secret eating.
The restrict binge. Risk, all of that. Yeah.
All of that. And it gets set up very, very early.
Yeah.
And I struggle in the psychology, parenting, kind of eating disorder space to kind of tread we don't want to be blaming parents. I've got 4 kids. I don't want to be held responsible for everything that might go amiss, even though I'll probably do it quite nicely myself. But on the other hand, we do need to be aware, because if we're not aware, we have no options.
I want to know if I'm screwing them up.
Yeah.
Right? Personally. Nobody likes to be told they're doing something, in quotes, wrong or potentially harmful. But if there's something that I am doing that somebody notices, that I'm friends with, not just a random person on the internet, just to clarify, but there's somebody that knows me, right, who's like able to be like, Josh, is that helpful or useful or whatever? I want to know that. Like, I don't want to be going, well, why didn't anybody tell me? You knew I was doing that and that was unhelpful and you didn't tell me. There's a balance between not being responsible for everything, but also I kind of feel like that's a responsibility that we have to bear by choosing to have children.
I completely agree.
We might not like it, but isn't that a reality of the responsibility?
Absolutely. And to take responsibility for the things you do screw up along the way.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done many a screw up. Even in my own field, of course I have, because the relationships you have with your kids are different to the relationships you have with your clients.
Yeah.
The bonds and the anxieties and the worries and the connection, it's all different.
Yeah.
So,
but that doesn't mean that we have full control over somebody developing something like an eating disorder.
oh
right?
my God, no.
You could do all of the wrong things and your kid might be absolutely fine.
And you
like,
can,
how did you get away with that? Great.
And you can do it in quotes, all of the right
Exactly.
things, or it might be a coping mechanism, or just, shit happens.
Or a friend they make at school and
Friend
whatever.
Or they kind of,
you can
get
set them up
hooked.
for safety as much as possible, but it's not always as perfect as that.
And
But in the same vein, please tell me if I'm screwing something up intentionally.
And when I first started in eating disorders a long time ago, it did feel much more that, yes, parents were integral to recovery if there was an eating disorder, but also there was a kind of responsibility piece. Whereas now, thankfully, it's much more, look, you are fundamental to your child's recovery.
Yeah.
So we have to bring you in because you are so integral, rather than we need to sit down and work out what went wrong and apportion response. That's completely the wrong way to do it.
Well, you can't change that at that point either, right?
But also it doesn't actually free people up to experiment because they're worried they're going to be blamed or shamed or judged or accused.
Hard to model if you're always second guessing what you're doing.
Exactly.
Right.
And modelling is so important. But I'm really curious, because what took you into this space from medicine? Because medicine notoriously, in the UK at least, has almost no nutrition training and very little eating disorder training.
Well, I would argue more eating disorder than nutrition training, ironically.
Wow.
Only because of the need to, at least at a surface level, understand the reason behind admitting somebody for medical care with an eating disorder, right? So I remember that being part of lecture type things. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a whole nother conversation on whether nutrition should be a larger part of medical school, and it's complicated, and I think we should have more respect for dietitians rather than believing that doctors should take over that role. I didn't get taught to be a physio at medical school. Is that a lacking? Or my wife as a physio would probably say that's good because you would screw it up. But yeah, I got into this through being exposed to someone who pointed out my own dodgy relationship with food and becoming or feeling very uncomfortable at being challenged about it, but it was a feeling I couldn't shift.
Was that during med school? Or?
No, that was post. So it was afterwards. So I, through many reasons, but the biggest that I could see from my childhood being an element of food insecurity as a teenager with a dad who was and is an alcoholic who would forget to feed us as kids, or thought that he had, and then send us to bed. So at the age of like 14, 15 was like, I'm not having this, I'm hungry. So I would have a food stash at home, which of course was food that was palatable, but wasn't particularly nutritious, that wouldn't meet my hunger needs, that then led to me also having dinner when my mum got home and then going, what do you mean you haven't had dinner? Let's have dinner. And I'd already had a tube of Pringles already. So there was an element of my childhood of I ended up at the end of my teenage years in a larger body than perhaps my body was on a trajectory of being at the start. And so I went through medical school feeling like I was limited to how good a doctor I could be because of my body size. And a lot of the world still does, right? Your visual representation of health has to be modeled as somebody who talks about health. And so fat doctors, that doesn't make sense. Like, that's confusing. It was in my brain at the time. And so I'd gone through diet after diet after diet. And then I got to graduating medical school and going, well, I'm going to do it properly this time. I'm going to start an Instagram account and post all the pictures of my food because then people can keep me accountable. And in words I now know how to express it, but had no idea at the beginning, I'm going to leverage shame as a way of keeping myself on track. And I mean, it was simply just random friends that I ended up as followers. There was no intention for this to be anything more than that. But I was just posting everything. I was like, if I post a picture of a biscuit, I'll be told off for having a biscuit and then I won't eat the biscuit. But obviously what happens is you just don't post the picture of the biscuit. And you eat less of them at the time. But because I was like, well, it kind of made me second guess every food choice I had. So it was just another diet essentially, but with social media involved. But I ended up losing a bunch of weight because I was essentially starving myself for a decent period of time, but felt very satisfied at this new apparent achievement that I had made. And along the way had developed this following on social media because I do know how to cook and I love cooking and I love food. which made it more hard, but it's a longer conversation.
Well, and it's not an uncommon.
Yeah, no. So I was able to make these very low-calorie meals that weren't very satisfying, but they looked nice. And so social media was all about looks, especially Instagram back in the days when stories didn't exist and it was just square photos. So I developed this following, and I ended up finding myself becoming this unintended influencer. And I started feeling this responsibility as a doctor who had suddenly lost weight and documented it and making vlogs on YouTube. And then I came across someone who was talking about Halo Top, of all things. That happened to be PhD Laura Thomas, who is a fantastic dietitian, American, lives in the UK. She was talking about Halo Top being problematic and potentially fueling disordered eating. And I went, I am not having any of that. That's nonsense. I love Halo Top. It's incredible. It only just arrived in the UK. I was like, this is great. I can eat the whole ice cream and it fits in my macros and my calories and all this stuff.
Well, I was about to say, for anyone who doesn't know, Halo Top is a supposedly low-calorie, healthier ice cream.
Healthier in massive quotes.
I was going to say lots of things wrong with that entire description.
It is designed to be eaten in one go, and that's okay and guilt-free. That is the entire marketing premise of Halo Top. And it's sold very commonly It's sold very commonly to any sort of gym goers, because it is just, that community is all over the Halo Top type world. But I came across her talking about it, and I, for some reason, sent her a message on Instagram, just a DM, because apparently I'm bald and don't know I shouldn't be doing that. Going, well, what do you mean it's this? I don't understand. Why are you saying this? That doesn't make sense to me. Surely a lower calorie alternative is better, was the exact quote that I wrote back then. She was kind enough to write back explaining it rather than going, who is this ego-filled young male doctor who's messaging me on Instagram? She sent me something back explaining a bit of it, and I didn't know how to respond, because I was like, oh, hang on, shit, what she's saying actually makes sense, but I've never thought about it like this before. So I then sent her a message going, can I come and meet you?
This is fantastic.
So she went, yes. And so I went, and for free, which was very kind of her as well, took up her entire lunch break one weekday in between her clients. And she sent me away with lots of new thoughts and an email with about 15 different research papers about weight neutral management of health and health at every size and intuitive eating. And I was like, this is a world I know nothing about. This is weird, but I don't feel like I can throw it away.
Which is amazing, because all of that is so challenging. You've been immersed in dieting and weight loss and low calorie.
Oh, I was right in the middle of finally seeing the very first ab I'd ever seen in my life and thinking I was like golden, right?
Yeah.
I never saw any of them, because then Laura ruined it and I ended up actually meeting my hunger needs and therefore not starving myself anymore.
And your body changing again.
Absolutely. But yeah, it was weird. And I don't know why I was open to it.
You were a medic, so you were interested in the science-based health part. And maybe there was a bit of you that knew that this wasn't the way.
I think one of the things that really prompted it, or at least allowed me to not just throw it away, was that I genuinely felt this sense of responsibility that I didn't want to get the influence that I had suddenly come across wrong. At the time, I thought, I don't think I agree with her completely, but maybe some of the stuff might be useful in terms of helping more people. And maybe principles of intuitive eating could be useful to improve people's relationship with food, and then they can diet in less problematic ways. I think that was where my brain initially went to, because it seemed like there was value, but I didn't know what it was. And I thought, well, if it's value, then that would be good. And this is a world I didn't know existed. And, there seem to be a lot of people in this world, and I didn't know why. And I thought, well, there must be something to this.
But as you say, you must have been open. There was enough of you that was willing to be curious.
Yeah. And I do think there were parts of I know for definite, there were elements of the dieting itself that just was unenjoyable, because that's what diets are, right? And so I'm looking for ways of going, well, maybe I could improve my relationship with food and then the dieting would be less problematic.
And I'd just lose more weight, but I'd enjoy it more.
Exactly. But it wouldn't be as horrible, and I wouldn't be chewing and spitting anymore, and I wouldn't be doing some of the stuff that was, again, in retrospect, super problematic. So
that it wasn't just a diet, was it? It was disordered eating if you're chewing and spitting.
Well, there were certain behaviours that were definitely higher up towards the eating disorder side. I don't know whether if I'd have been formally assessed, I might have ticked some of those boxes. I probably wouldn't have done, because my body size was still too high. And definitely 10 years ago, we were focusing on that quite a lot. and
we
still
accept
probably well, let's see. There's a lot of weight stigma still within the diagnosis of eating disorders, right?
Weight stigma, but at least back then, if you'd seen someone specialist in eating rather than
probably
that's the difference.
Yeah.
Then you'd have met probably a certain number of criteria, but not the weight one. At which point you just get the atypical diagnosis, which is, we can talk diagnosis all day. What's the point of a diagnosis?
Typical or atypical?
Does it matter if you have a diagnosis or not? Yeah. But I suppose quite a lot of people don't know, for example, about chewing and spitting. They don't know the effects of significant calorie restriction and what it does to you. And behaviors.
I knew it wasn't good, but I was just like, well, it's how I can eat mince pies at Christmas. That was the justification in my head.
Without taste.
How I can have the initial joy from mince pies at Christmas.
Yeah.
Without having to stop my housemate continuing to keep a tally on the wall. All of the stuff that looking back on is super obvious as being very problematic. And I mean, again, all dieting in my mind is quite problematic in and of itself, but in terms of the way that then became. But yeah, I feel like there was probably an element of that where, because I felt very uncomfortable about it, there was probably a part of my brain that was going, well, this could be better as long as I stay thin.
So then what happened next?
Well, I then spent 12 months doing a U-turn on social media accidentally, which is fun to look back on.
I was going to say, all of your social media sounds slightly accidental up to this point.
Well, it wasn't like I was like, oh, well, I'm weight neutral now, because that definitely wasn't what I thought or what the plan was. Instagram stories had just kind of come about. And so it was then sharing thoughts on social media along with posts alongside. And my thoughts and what I was talking about was all food related. So it was starting to explore what intuitive eating was and starting to explore hunger cues in a different way, but documenting that and talking about it. And because I was learning about it as I went, everyone came with me, which was nice because I didn't get backlash from it by talking about it, but I think it allowed me to continue exploring it because people were then exploring it with me as well. And before I knew it, 12 months had passed and I knew I had to change my Instagram name because it was then relatively problematic because it wasn't my name. It was just @unfattening, which was a very clever name, but it had to go. And I'm glad it never got tattooed anywhere.
That would have been genius, wouldn't it?
I know. I would have had to get a line through it. And then, I mean, maybe it ends up happening at some point in my life anyway, just as a marker of like, this is definitely a past thing. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
And then, so how did that translate from that into what you do now? Because in some ways it sounds very organic. In other ways, it's quite a U-turn.
Yeah. So all of the kind of more stereotypical medicine stuff was still going alongside it. I was at the time training to be a surgeon and thought I was going to go into orthopedics and hand surgery and things. Alongside that, I was then starting to recognize that a lot of my content that I had been talking about in terms of myth busting from a weight loss perspective initially was like, going low carb isn't the answer. It's just calories, like the kind of half myth busting. That kind of content is still real. It's just different now in terms of what I'm talking about. And I started getting a lot of questions from people. I started getting a lot of people asking for help and going, I feel really uncomfortable that I can't help you. I don't know why I'm better now, right? Like this wasn't like a deliberate thing. I just accidentally stopped being disordered and I don't know how, but I didn't go through like a formal intuitive eating journey or anything like that. It was confusing in my brain, but it was still the whole kind of, I want to help as many people as I can through this because that was what the influencing became. So I went, okay, nutritional science degree, training in intuitive eating, going down some of those pathways to then go, could I do this more formally?
Right.
And utilize what I think is I don't know whether it was learned or inbuilt, but an ability to speak to people one-on-one from a communication perspective that I didn't want to waste as a skill, and something that I've always found as one of the things that I'm good at, if you had to write it down on a CV, would have been the communication side. Like I'm not actually that great at studying books front to back, but the communication side was something that I was like, actually, I can do this and I like this. And, I'm the one that they send to the psych patients in the hospital because nobody else has the desire or the ability to talk to them. I'm like, okay, I need to use this. That was not necessarily in the moment. Some of it was kind of retrospect as well. But I am definitely an advocate for knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. And instead of just forcing yourself to be better at something that is actually quite hard for you, just the stuff that you're good at,
go do it.
Go with that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that was kind of that.
So what was the first thing you really wanted people to understand?
Oh, I think it was probably that dieting isn't risk-free was the biggest thing that I had changed my opinion on, that I didn't realize had been such a strong belief in my head. And then with further exploration within the medical world of treating dieting as this risk-free endeavor that you just needed to try again. And any potential risks were massively outweighed by all these benefits, apparently.
And that narrative hasn't really changed.
That hasn't changed. No, not within the medical world.
It's not even the medical world, is it? It's everywhere.
No.
I would suggest it's got worse, actually.
Yeah, with GLP-1s, 100%. Yeah. But I think that was a lot of my messaging on social media was around that initially. Of kind of just going, well, like, I'm not going to tell you to stop dieting, but you know the risks, please. Of like, let's actually have some informed consent around these things rather than just go, well, it didn't work? Ah, it's okay, don't worry, let's just try a different one.
And if dieting did work, there wouldn't always be new ones released.
No.
So I get a lot of questions about obesity is rising. It's really damaging for health. How can you possibly say that dieting isn't? How can you walk that path?
I would say there's two things I usually tend to say to that. One is we don't use the extremes to justify the rule in any other walks of life. And most of the time people are using extreme examples to justify what they're saying. And that's usually extremes of body size, going, yes, but if you are this size, then surely. I'm like, okay. So, but what are we talking about now? Are we talking about an extreme of body size, or are we using that example to justify everything else? And I also then ask, well, until we can get some studies done that actually use weight stigma as an independent risk factor for people's health in and of itself, rather than just blaming someone's body size, then I'd like to talk about the risks still, please. Because I think there are a lot of questions that I think still need to be had around this very dogmatic being at X body size is bad for you. And there has been recent research looking at reduction in diabetes rates without body size change, for example, after years of everybody saying, well, it's just simply impossible unless you shrink your body size. There is research looking at whether or not the development of type 2 diabetes that is associated with body size is due to the chronic stress relationship that people live at, or that people are exposed to by living at a higher body weight.
And that would be, because I haven't seen that research, it would be really interesting.
Yeah,
that would be
the
about
amount of weight stigma that they are exposed to on a day in, day out basis has an impact on their cortisol levels chronically, and that chronically people who are exposed to chronically high levels of stress are more likely to develop chronic disease, including type 2 diabetes. We have that very clearly in research around racism, for example. But we don't want to research weight stigma in any sort of proper way. I was about to say, I'm not sure why, but I kind of do know why. Because we should set research up to prove ourselves wrong. Unfortunately, a lot of the time we set research up to justify what we think is true to begin with. We forget the whole principle of a null hypothesis a lot of the time and just go, well, how about we just do research into weight loss and reduction in diabetes rather than look at research into, well, why are they actually developing in the first place if it may not be body size?
And it's multifactorial.
Yeah.
We know it's never just one factor. There are always lots and lots of different factors and different variables that contribute.
Exactly, which is why people at all ranges of body size develop type 2 diabetes. And we don't talk about that. We just talk about the fact that you're more at risk if. It's like, okay, but why? Right, why is that? And could we improve people's health without reducing their weight and exposing them to all of these risks that intentional weight loss comes with? And if the answer is yes, time and time again, then I'm quite happy to stick to that way. And I feel equally as scientific and as happy in my medical training doing it that way as I was beforehand. And I just feel like there is a lot less risk this way.
I certainly agree with you on most of that. The thing that, again, I get lots of pushback on is, yes, but intuitive eating, and I think it comes with a lack of understanding, is it's just permission to eat whatever you want, whenever you want, and just go, well, it doesn't matter. And that is not actually what intuitive eating is.
I mean, well, firstly, it's a structured framework.
Right.
Right. And permission is definitely an overarching principle, but is one of 9 principles, right? Not just the only one. My reply to that often is, why is that the one that you're focusing on? Is that because that's the one that challenges you the most?
And frightens.
Right.
So you can challenge, but I also
Yeah.
think it's so much
Absolutely.
is fear-based. You know, people
Is that the one, if you had to pick one, is that the one you think you struggle with the most? Is usually the truth behind why that particular person is asking it.
Yeah.
Well, none of us have true permission around food a lot of the time. And that's the one that feels the most out of reach and the most scary, and the one that feels like you would have to lose a lot of control in order to get. And that frightens people.
That's what the conversation is about. If you're really going to explore your relationship with food, a lot of it is challenging people's assumptions around, yes, but it is just wrong, but sugar is just bad. But, you know, the research shows it is as addictive as cocaine. No, the research doesn't, by the way, show that. But I get a lot of that. I imagine you have those conversations not infrequently.
I feel like I've placed myself in a position now where I don't get as many of them, which is quite nice. I think those questions were often from colleagues initially. I think a lot of the stuff that I would have would be from other medically trained, and the breadth of medicine, right? Not just medicine, but the breadth of any sort of healthcare setting. That would be where I'd get the most of those questions from, rather than the layperson. But I think that may be the context of how I've positioned myself and who is following me in the way that my client base comes from my social media profile. Right. I think if I was a searchable counsellor type thing, then I think that would be very different. I would be answering a lot more of those questions in clinic rather than, actually, I tend not to have as many of those conversations, which is nice. And sometimes it's important too, because people come thinking that they're in agreement, and then we need to do some challenging along the way. But it's usually in a different context, which is quite nice now.
So when you are in the hospital, when you are working in the NHS and you're in clinic, how much weight stigma do you still see now?
So A&E is a bit of a fascinating place to work, and it's different. I think I saw a lot more when I was working in orthopedics, massively.
That's so interesting.
In regards to the kind of weight-based cut-offs that we have for joint replacements and accessing care and things like that. In A&E, it's more challenging colleagues' comments around things and potentially reassuring patients when they have experienced certain reactions by healthcare professionals to what they've come in with. For example, if somebody's coming in with issues with their gallbladder, there's an acronym in medicine. I think it's the 4 Fs or the 5 Fs, which is the fair, female, 40s, and fat, which is the medical acronym of remembering the type of patient who is more likely to have gallstones. So there's an assumption that if you're fat, you have gallstones, because that then becomes pervasive in terms of if there's a correlation between those two things, then everybody who's fat must have that, right? That's kind of how weight stigma works. And so patients will have been told when they come in pain with biliary colic, where their gallbladder is spasming and causing a lot of pain, they will have been told that it's because they're fat by somebody somewhere at some point.
No other possible investigation or explanation as to why?
Well, the thing is that there isn't really a cause a lot of the time. It's more just, it's unfortunate. You have gallstones now, and we now need to deal with it. And either your gallbladder comes out or it's manageable without surgery. But there isn't really a perfect cause, which is why there's more of a demographic of patient that it's more likely to occur in. So they've been told this at some point. And I will not infrequently have people who, when I'm seeing them and asking them about it and ask them how frequently it's coming and if they've been referred to the surgeons already and where they're at, and we'll give them some pain relief, that some people will say, oh, I know it's because I'm fat and I'm trying. And I'm like, no, this is not.
Well, and that takes us, doesn't it, right, to the shame piece.
Yeah.
And often a reluctance to seek medical help because you've been told that you somehow are responsible for your health difficulties.
Yeah.
And indeed your good health. But it's a matter of complete personal responsibility, which I think is problematic.
Yeah, right. But probably the first time they've ever heard anybody in a position of authority tell them that that's not what we need to be talking about. And
do you find that you're unusual in your colleagues?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Hugely so.
So it is still as loud as ever?
Yeah. But I think there has been a shift in how blatant sometimes, or there was until potentially some of the GLP-1 injections. But there was a shift, and I would say probably still is, around the manner in which some of these conversations take place, because I think there has been a more societal understanding of the harm that our words can have, and not just around weight, but just in general, right? I think, and a good shift, which has now just been termed woke by anybody who doesn't want to talk about it, but of actually understanding things like racism and privilege and stuff that came out of Black Lives Matter and the stuff over the last 5-6 years. And so I think that has been good, because I think you get less doctors just going, this is because you're fat, which I think would have been way more common. I think just now it gets written in discharge summaries. It won't necessarily be said directly to the patient, but they will read it in the discharge summary that then gets sent to their GP. So it's a bit less blatant, a bit more subtle, but still there.
I'm not sure that just a bit more subtle is much better.
It's not much better, but it means that, and a lot of patients don't read all of their discharge summaries, right? So actually some patients may just never feel like the doctors are thinking that way about them. But the people that do and have been told it, that's why not everybody comes in saying, I've been trying to lose weight, but a lot of people do. And being reassured in that moment and go, that's okay, but that's not why this is happening, right?
And then the privilege piece is really important, because there's also an awful lot of noise at the moment around ultra-processed foods, highly palatable foods. And there is a huge privilege piece in that. I'm not sure what you think, but, you know, there is, I don't hear as much conversation around that.
No.
As there should be.
No. What was it the other day? There was some food item that they were trying to campaign to put a label on because it was ultra-processed, and they wanted to do that. And I was just like, this is supermarket bread. Maybe it was that. I think it was that.
It's supermarket bread.
Yeah, of wanting to put a label on supermarket bread of it being bad for your health. And so that everybody knows it's ultra-processed. And it's like, who are you helping? From a public health perspective, who are you genuinely helping? What measurable health impact are you actually going to have by doing that? The people who are already able to buy the bakery sourdough bread are not the people whose lives are actually going to change by reducing the amount of ultra-processed food in their life, because they probably don't have a huge amount of it already.
If you could change narratives, policies, or at least if you give people actionable kind of points, if they were looking for them, if they were listening to this, going, actually, I would prefer, if I could, to change a few things, what would you say?
Well, let's change the things that are measurable in your life that are actually doable, right? Like there are lots of things that we can and cannot change about our health and about the things that we are exposed to. It's a bit of a facetious example, but I like to use the example of the taller you are, the more likely you are to develop cancer at some point in your life, because you have more cells, because you're larger.
Is that a scientifically proven fact?
But you can't change your height. I mean, there are some weird surgeries that take place, but you can't change your height. But we don't think about it like that. We just go, well, that obviously I can't change that, right? But I can change my ultra-processed food. It's like, no. There are things that increase your risk and decrease your risk of lots of different things all of the time. And they're actually a lot smaller changes than you think as well.
That can make a difference.
Well, not necessarily the smaller changes, but in terms of how much of a reduction in your, let's say, colon cancer risk would reducing all of the ultra-processed food in your diet actually do? It would be minimal, actually. Because if you weren't paying attention to your movement and your sleep and all of the other stuff that's going on in your life, and actually the fiber, because you could have a pretty decent fiber intake, but also have lots of ultra-processed food because you might just be supplementing it all.
Which actually takes me back to where we were talking at the very beginning about your book, Food Isn't Medicine. Because people do forget. There's a disproportionate understanding, isn't there, of the importance of sleep, stress, movement, and a greater focus on food.
Yeah, and a greater focus on the stuff that makes them feel good about themselves when they change it, which is perhaps a little bit controversial, but in terms of the...
Say more?
Well, so I think the topic around ultra-processed food, the only reason why anybody cares about it at the moment is because it feels like a we're patting ourselves on the back kind of movement. Nobody who is living in a socioeconomic bracket where they are living off ultra-processed foods because of necessity and access, for whom the amount of ultra-processed food in their diet is actually impacting their health, nobody has that as their main focus as to what they want to change. They want to change everything else that's going on, like childcare access, like the hours of work that they're having to do, like, you know, all of the government policies that are impacting their life. They couldn't care less if they suddenly got cheap sourdough bread in the supermarket. And it wouldn't really arguably change their life. by any real measurable, the only people for whom this is impacting is the worried well who are already well. And so I do think a lot of this is we're doing really well. We're changing good policy. We're doing all of these things to help the poor. And we're not doing any of this stuff by putting labels on bread. And I just think the whole thing is massively short-sighted. Whereas changing things like access to food, but again, not just that, but also access to everything. So like a living wage, actual maternity pay, actually changing 0-hour contracts around jobs, like the stuff that actually matters, that is going to give people better sleep, that is going to actually reduce the stress in their lives, that is going to give them more ability to maybe buy a microwave, like the kind of stuff that we don't like to talk about. That's the stuff that is actually going to improve people's health. It just gets really tiring.
It's very noisy.
Arguing against all of the crap because everyone just goes, yes, but surely this must be a good idea. For you, go for it, right? But actually, you're not helping the people you think you're helping. And, great, like go for it.
I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. As we've mentioned, we've touched on GLP-1s. We haven't really touched on the psychology, but a relationship with food is psychology, isn't it? It's trauma. It's how you manage stress. It's how you manage big feelings. It's what's been passed down to you from parents. We haven't had time for that, sadly. But all of that goes into all of this, doesn't it? And as a kind of final takeaway, again, partly on the food isn't medicine thing, what would you like people to, what nugget would you like?
I would love people to do something that increases the amount of joy around food.
Yeah.
Intentionally. Because none of the advice that is widely available is particularly joy focused. If we just did one thing that was, well, what do I enjoy eating? How do I enjoy eating? Eating with? Do I enjoy eating at the table? Maybe. Is there a memory of a food that I loved that I just don't make anymore? And why? And just do one thing that would improve the amount of joy that you have around food. Maybe just one day of not dieting.
Oh God, I love that.
Right? And just go, was that better? Was that a nice thing? Are you magically fat the next day? Right? All the fears that we have around doing the things that are joyous, but we don't think we're able to do. And it's frightening sometimes, but let's just do it once. You just do it once and then go back to do what you were doing.
And once isn't always, once is just once.
Yeah, let's just do it once and see what it's like.
Yeah.
And know that joy is possible whilst also being healthy. And we're told it can't be, and that's just nonsense.
Well, God, I love that as a takeaway. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. I could have talked forever.
No worries.
I'll have to do another one.
Next time.
Thank you. If this episode resonated, please follow, share and review. And if you're navigating your own issues, please remember that you're not alone and that change and recovery are both possible. Join me next time as we continue exploring the psychology, science and lived realities of how and why we eat. See you then.